So I just want to welcome everyone to this event. I think, yeah, just started. So I just wanted to welcome you all to Laser Boston Climate Visions. My name is Anur Issa. I'm the digital production and content manager at Swissnex in Boston and New York. And so this edition of Laser Boston is actually our first laser in over a year. And we are super happy to welcome everyone back into this space. And really excited to have our panelists give some incredible talks on the topic. So I just wanted to give a few words about Swissnex and our partner SciArt initiative. So Swissnex in Boston and New York is part of a global network of Swissnex locations dedicated to helping unlock a new generation of ideas for Switzerland and the world of tomorrow. So here in Boston and our outpost in New York, we work with forward-thinking partners at the frontiers of education, research, and innovation across the American Northeast. A little bit about SciArt. SciArt is a nonprofit organization dedicated to bridging the gulf between the arts and the sciences. In addition to hosting laser in collaboration with us, they have a publication, residency program, monthly events like meetups and book clubs, and host annual art exhibitions which surround themes of science and technology. You can visit their website as you can Swissnex's. Their website is sciartinitiative.org, and ours is swissnex.org/Boston. So anyways, with that information out of the way, let's get down to the meat, so to speak, of this event. So visualizing the climate crisis through data visualization and various forms of art is super crucial right now. Right now, we're facing unprecedented climate change, and every year the consequences grow more dire, as we might all know. So 2022 is on track to be the warmest year on record yet again, joining the ranks of previous years. And simply presenting people with accurate data on the climate crisis has proved time and time again not enough to spur widespread action across collectives, individuals, but also governments. And so that's where the power of visualization comes in. So can climate data paired with powerful visuals and art provoke a more visceral reaction to this crisis? So I have the pleasure of discovering that with 4 distinguished panelists who are tackling climate change visualization in their own unique and equally powerful ways. So today you'll have the opportunity to hear from Swiss artist Marie Griesmar, Miami-based artist and UMiami professor Xavier Cortada, environmental artist and University of New Mexico professor Andrea Polli, and NASA data visualization expert Mark SubbaRao. You'll hear more about each speaker before their talk, so don't worry. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off our first laser talk by Marie Griesmar, titled Clay Marinescape for Underwater Biodiversity, a Coral Story. Marie is just a few words about Marie. These definitely don't do her breadth of work justice, but I will try. So Marie is a Swiss artist who lives and works in Zurich, Switzerland. She often evokes the dialectic between visible and invisible, as well as the phenomenology of perception through installations, sculpture, paintings, and publications. She's particularly interested in water ecologies. So the practice of scuba diving has really enabled her to use the element of water as a space of creation, production, or interaction. Deploying a range of references that combine contemporary philosophy with marine biology and aspects of post-structuralist theory, she develops a polysemic work imbued with formal, ecological, and narrative research. So in 2020, with 2 marine biologists, Marie actually co-founded Reefs, or our Reefs, an association aimed at restoring coral reefs. And she'll tell you more about that, but it's really incredible stuff. Basically 3D printing coral reefs to replace kind of broken down ecosystems with clay, which is fascinating. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Marie to give her laser talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I'm going to start to play my PowerPoint. Can you all see it? I don't see the Zoom, so if you see it, just tell me. Okay. So thank you so much for having me to this amazing panel. I was extremely excited to participate again to a scientific and art panel organized also by Swissnex, as I was in 2018 a fellow at Swissnex, but in San Francisco. So it's really dear to my heart to be here today. And I'm super excited to share a little bit of my work with you tonight, or today, because we are not at night in Boston.
One second, I think your PowerPoint is not showing yet. Do you mind trying to present again?
Sure, of course. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. There we go.
But you could hear me though.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, good.
Awesome.
Perfect. I didn't start to show anything anyway, so it was just this slide. Good, so this is my first slide. Nothing spectacular, just the title, but I'm very excited to give you a little bit more insight about my artistic practice and how it literally shifted from only artistic practice to something a little bit more embedded with the science and climate actions. So a little bit about myself. I'm from Switzerland, from the French part, where you have this very big lake called Lac Léman. And since I'm a very little kid, I'm a scuba diver, and water has been literally all the time there in my life and has been a huge fascination subject of what's living there, what type of phenomenology of visual things that I could see underwater is there. And of course, the element of being, underwater and able to breathe and to move in a different space has really, really helped me in my artistic practice to kind of convey ideas and emotions that I want to share afterwards in the work that I do. And for multiple years, I was mostly interested in showing what was in the lakes or in the rivers. So I was very, very interested in limnology or marine ecologies, as they are the first sources of knowledge that I could get when I had questions about it. And over the years, I noticed that my work could be also kind of a tool that I could use to showcase things that are very important and then we don't see, because when you are next to some water, you just see kind of a surface. You don't really think about what's underneath it. And in the literature, you have all this crazy world, and it's a little bit a fantastic, like underwater. It kind of like rings a sentiment that you don't know of, unknown, and sometimes some kind of fears. But actually, when you see what's going on, you see beauty, you see an amazing world. And that's basically what I've been doing all my life, is like just scuba diving, taking impression and share it then to the world. I will specifically talk about the corals, because even though I love lakes and rivers, corals have something even more spectacular to me, as they are like organisms, living organisms, and they play a huge role in the entire balance of our planet. I don't know if you're aware, probably you know it, but this is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. And these little things that are very, very tiny animals that looks like rock and behave kind of like kind of plants are the home of 25% of all marine organisms that you can find in the ocean. And they are only covering 1% of our planet, but they have this huge importance of being like the cradle so many life underneath the surface of the water. And I mean, I'm kind of a nerd, but I got really interested in how those little tiny polyps are functioning and why they're functioning and why they are creating amazing shapes. Because of course, visually, I'm attracted to shapes. I'm attracted to composition, colors. And when you dive and you see all these colors and crazy like morphology of things, you're kind of living in a dream. And so I got a bit obsessed with corals and decided to annoy a little bit of the scientists that I knew to tell me a bit more about it. And the more I knew, the more I wanted to help these little fragile animals, because they look robust, but actually they're really fragile. In the picture you see on the left, you see a polyp and a lot of tiny points. And these tiny points are basically an algae that is living in the tissue of corals and creates a perfect relationship between the tissue of the coral and this algae. And together they are living, and it's called a symbiotic relationship. And basically the algae within the tissue is collecting through the lights that is going through the water, is processing the photosynthesis and creates food for the coral, and the coral can then grow and create a better skeleton, and the skeleton will create structure, and so on and so on. But unfortunately, as you know, there is a lot of global and local stressors, such as pollution, such as climate change, rise of temperatures of the seas, and so on, that kind of breaks this amazing relationship. And the algae is then exposed away from the polyps. And this leave the corals like bare, like without tissue anymore that is protecting the skeleton. And this is what we call a bleaching event. And this bleaching event it's a horrible phenomenon, because the corals then is left to die. I'm going to quickly show you, before that I show you very dramatic pictures, what is possible to achieve when you leave like these corals growing. It can grow to like massive structures, and we can see it from the sky, such as barrier reefs. Like you have these huge coral barrier reefs. The most known one is in Australia, but you can also see these magnificent atolls on the left. And before, it was also in Europe. And if you have ever been to the Dolomites, this is on the right, this is basically calcium carbonate made from the skeletons of corals, and are making these amazing, crazy mountains. And unfortunately, right now, all of this ecosystem is at risk, because if we are living our society still not stopping what creates more issues in climate change, in 2030, we will have 90% of all coral reefs dying. And this is something that personally moves me a lot, and I don't want it to happen. And luckily, I'm not the only one. So I've been trying since 7 years to try solutions in how, as an artist, I could try to find maybe a mitigation solution against the loss of coral structure. So I'm going to show you here a picture of when a bleaching event happened, or like if there is even like a local stressor, that like a hurricane, for instance, and then the algae is exposed from the body of the coral and it doesn't come back together, then there is the coral left to die, and you have this 3D structure that is suddenly very fragile. Bacteria is going inside the skeleton, and it starts to crumble the whole structure. And this structure is extremely important to host other animals, such as fish, such as mollusks, crabs, and everything. So if you lose this 3D structure, you lose also the whole ecosystem around it. And further, in this dramatic event, you have then algae that are covering this structure. And when you think of a coral, maybe you've heard we have supercorals, And supercorals is basically in the genetics of the coral, they can fight some stressors that are happening, but sometimes it needs more time to adapt. And we don't have right now the time to let the genetics and the corals to adapt to all the stressors that are happening. So what I'm doing right now with my two colleagues at Reefs is that we are trying to create structure in which coral larvae, they can find a suitable structure where they can grow and have a bit more chances to be not left at dying if there is another local stressor or global stressor happening. This research took a long time before I could found this association. It took me 7 years, and I want to show you here what it looked like before. So this is some installation. Some are in San Francisco. The one on the right is in San Francisco in Swissnex. The one on upstairs is the first coral reef that I did in 2016 in the Red Sea, and it was the first time that I really worked closely with scientists. And I think it's an amazing moment where you have different fields conveying in the same goal, and which was creating a great substrate, creating a great home for coral reefs and living organisms in the Red Sea, and how altogether you can then exchange knowledge and try to find solution. And that, I think, is one of the best moments in my life, is that you have amazing people with a lot of will to make changes and to take action for making solutions. And I think a thing that art can achieve is also have a little bit of emotion add to it. And this is not just a cube or something functional. It also has something that is you can show in a different public space, and that creates a bit more of a synergy around the topic. So my focus was to find the best shapes to kind of like have more properties towards the regrowth of coral reefs. And after a lot of mistakes and failures and a lot of research also into materiality and finding great materials within the realm of materials for underwater ecosystems, I found that clay is a very, very great material to have marine organisms attaching to it. So I'm going to show you a very quick video of the last prototype, which is now the current prototype, of a modular system that I developed. And it's basically clay that is 3D printed, and to create the bricks that you can stack on top of each other. And we adapt the shape of the main structure to create the best shape possible in combination with currents. Then the currents will bring baby larvae coral on the structure, and each structure of the bricks have kind of an optimized pattern that creates like some kind of rugosity, where coral larvae will like to attach and grow. And because it's a very, very competitive area underwater, you kind of have to create some type of complexity and different types of diversity to have the most biodiverse reef possible. And this is basically what we did. And that's the first prototype that we installed 6 months ago in Colombia, in San Andres. On the right are all the people that are partnering with us to make that prototype happening. And we are extremely, extremely happy with my colleagues. So I have to mention them. Their name is Ulrike Freund and Hannah Kufus. They are both marine biologists. And all together, we are trying to develop the best, most optimized brick system to host coral larvae. And science and art combined together can create really amazing synergies, as I was saying earlier. And I encourage really people to to not be afraid to work in other fields that they don't feel really comfortable. And even if it's not a comfort zone, it doesn't matter. You should just do it, because you will create fireworks when some things like this happen. Right now, it looks like this. So it really evolved a lot. So if you look at the bare brick right now, this is like a terracotta clay. And now you see on the left, this is all the organisms that have been attached to it. And you see a little bit of corals that we also put from a coral nursery. And it was just so emotional to go back there for the first monitoring that we did, and to see so much life and so much things happening that you cannot even control, because nature is taking over. I'm just checking the hour. I have 1 minute left. Perfect. So as an artist, what I do is I still continue to develop the design of the bricks. I also take impressions of what's happening underwater, and all together in my team right now, we are sharing all our knowledge to make it even better and more optimized for the future. So my wish is like for in the future that our politics and our governments can understand how important it is to invest also in environmental initiatives, because they are really important to mitigate and save endangered biodiversity. So this is really my hope, and I think science and art together can achieve that, to make realize how important that is. Without ado, I'm thanking you a lot for listening to me and listening to the project. If you have any question, you can shoot them in the chat. And if you want to contact me also later, I would be really, really happy to answer you. Thank you so much, Anouar and everyone, for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Marie. That was so moving, and it's really an excellent demonstration of how innovatively you can connect science, art, and technology to tackle climate change. So really appreciate it. Again, if you have questions, please submit them through our Q&A chat box, and we will register them and compile them, and then we'll kind of tackle them all at the end. Yeah, so now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Xavier Cortada, with a talk titled "The Underwater: Using Socially Engaged Art to Map a Community's Vulnerability to Rising Seas." And Xavier, I'd love to invite you to come up to our little stage. Yeah, so a few words about Xavier. He's an artist and professor of practice at University of Miami, Department of Art and Art History, with secondary appointments in the School of Law and the Miller School of Medicine. Cortada uses art's elasticity to work across disciplines and to engage communities in problem solving. Particularly environmentally focused, his work generates awareness and action around climate change, sea level rise, and biodiversity loss. Over the past 3 decades, this Cuban American artist has created the art at the North and South Poles and across 6 continents, including more than 150 public artworks and dozens of installations, collaborative murals, and socially engaged projects. He's been commissioned to create art for CERN, the White House, the World Bank, and Miami City Hall, among many other art, science, history, and government venues. So we are really honored to have you with us, Xavier. And I'd love to invite you to come on the stage, and we have a video that you're going to be playing for us. And so if you want to introduce that, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. So thrilled to be here, and what an incredible panel you've put together. Thank you. I'm honored to be with them, and I'm honored to be here with so many listeners. We are at the precipice of catastrophe. The science tells us that, but not enough are listening. I think all the artists here are trying to have us understand that, and the work I do uses experiential methods to pique curiosity, to make you engaged and make you interested in the problem solving. And I do that by giving you agency and allowing you to understand that you are part of the solution, that you literally have a role and a voice. And I do it in the most peculiar of ways. This is what I call an Antarctic ice painting. I created it in Antarctica in 2006 when researchers from the Western Antarctic ice sheet, yep, this is one of those, I was looking at the label at the back. Some were created with sea ice, others with Antarctic glaciers. The scientists who gave me the ice that I used to create this piece were giving me the ice that is going to melt and drown my house, where I am sitting right now, Miami. And in 2006, that was so shocking to me that I created a complete shift in my practice, where I used to engage in socially engaged art projects addressing all sorts of issues across society, and focused almost exclusively on the environmental crisis in front of us. And I continue doing that to the day. And here in Miami, ground zero for sea level rise, where literally we have Swiss cheese, oolite, limestone under our feet, we are suffering an existential crisis. And I wanted to let the people from my community understand that. I did that by translating those paintings into signs that they would then take and use. Well, let the video let you tell the story. Andrea, if you could play the video.
Yes, give me
Great.
one.
I'll talk through you. So here's a video that captures the work with the underwater. Just last night, we had a town hall in Little Havana, which is the latest iteration. It's a creative capital funded art project. I'm doing it through the University of Miami and the research team that I'm involved with there. And of course, in Miami, this is relevant. I'm just waiting for you, Andrea. In Miami, this is so play whenever you're ready. So in Miami, this is relevant, among other reasons, because Miami literally is at the Caribbean basin. And we used to have political refugees come to Miami. We will soon have climate refugees. Here's the video.
You see it okay?
Yeah. I don't hear it though. Anura, I don't hear it.
I am an artist, a socially engaged artist, an artist that tries to use the elasticity of art to work across disciplines to reframe the way we think and work together to problem solve. And specifically, the problem I'm trying to solve is the existential crisis that Miami faces in a changing world, a world changing by climate change and sea level rise. I called it the Underwater Homeowners Association. I could have just as easily called it the Sea Level Advocacy Group, you know what I mean? But what I wanted was to organize a folks of people who wouldn't be involved in politics or in environmental issues to take ownership of a problem. Like if your neighbor sees a number 6 in front of your house, your neighbor knows that you too are a number 6. So you're no longer a Democrat or Republican or an anti-science or pro-science person. You're both literally standing at the same elevation. So what I was trying to do is just shine a light on this whole process. There were realtors who were upset about me doing this because they thought it would have a negative impact on their sales and their property values. And in my mind, all I kept on thinking about was, so where's your ethical duty? So it's okay for you to sell a house and just sort of hide, you know, what you don't want the buyer to know.
That's Hialeah, right? 3, okay. Oh my God.
Yes, it is an art project, but I think that the strength of the project is being able to bring people together am hoping that you will all make signs today. And then hopefully put those in your yards, and then have a chance to talk to your neighbors about them when they say, what is that funny sign in your yard?
When I say I try to make the invisible visible, because of the way that we've developed Miami-Dade County by pouring asphalt into where the natural flows of water across this community, we don't have a sense of how the water flows and, more importantly, how and where it will rise. So by giving you a visual, by mapping, by putting markers, talking to you about the elevation of Miami-Dade County across the entire spectrum of our community, you begin to visualize your vulnerability, your community's vulnerability, and in so doing are empowered to do something about it. And the way I ask you to do something about it is by putting a sign in your front yard that has the elevation of your property, so that when your neighbor sees it, it's not a conflicting political sign, and it's not even a for sale sign. It's a sign that says, I am standing at this elevation, which means so are you. And hopefully that's a catalyst for conversations for them to begin to try to figure out how to address the issue of rising seas inland when they thought they were inoculated by the distance from the bay. But they're not, because now they know what their elevation is. And if their elevation is the same as it is at the coast, they're as vulnerable as the coast.
Short drive from denial downtown to bargaining, depression, and acceptance in Pinecrest.
I live in Pinecrest. I'm at 11.
I'm 8.54 feet.
My name is Steelfit from Pine.
Where neighbors have formed America's first underwater homeowners association.
I'm at 7 feet, lower than I thought, to be honest. My name is Judy, and I'm here for hope and for inspiration.
There was some really negative response when people recoiled and say, why are you doing this? You're going to hurt us and hurt our property values, which I found to be part of the cancer I'm trying to cure.
It is the brainchild of artist and activist Xavier Cortada.
What's happening in our community?
For water covers the street in the next century, there will be an aquifer below it that will not give you the fresh water that you drink in these homes. And before that happens, there's going to be a flood insurance rise. As that happens, there's going to be property value evaluation, because all of a sudden the psychology of the house being an investment is going to be starting to turn on its head.
Now, my home is in danger, a whole bunch of homes next to me.
The fear is palpable here in Miami. So what I wanted to do is give people a mechanism for coping and dealing with that fear and preparing for the inevitable.
I also create processes, these meetings that I convene, so that people can come, learn, talk, share ideas, but more importantly, begin to figure out how they're going to work together to solve those problems. And that is what the Underwater Homeowners Association is. It's a series of processes, starting with you taking a nap, figuring out what the elevation of your property is, taking that, making a sign, putting the elevation of your property on the sign, making you courageous, making you audacious enough to say, I am living in a vulnerable home. Announcing that, letting the truth be out, and then being empowered to do something about that with your neighbor day after day. I do that because it's easier to ignore the problem. But there are too many who will suffer if we don't begin to address that problem today. So by creating these processes, empowering people, bringing them together, talking about it, I elevate the conversation. I make it comfortable for us to talk about it. And when you do that, I think we start moving society and humanity forward. Miami will suffer in the decades to come. It will suffer more if we do nothing about it. I want to create processes where we begin to understand what's going to happen to Miami-Dade County. And I want policies that find an equitable answer to that. Some people know what the problem is, and they're hedging their bets. Other people are clueless. There has to be policy that addresses the divide of what will happen to some properties and what will happen to other areas of our county. And that policy has to be equitable so that if someone is going to lose everything and someone else is going to gain, there is a process that elected officials develop to manage that. If we leave it to market forces alone, which is a solution, I do believe that the vast majority of people in Miami-Dade County will suffer because they don't have the access to the information or the resources to move. And I want us to begin to understand how, as a community, we solve this, the greatest problem that we have facing us.
Leading scientists from across the globe gave the planet a final call, stating that drastic actions are required in order to avoid a climate change catastrophe. This week, we meet the artists bringing climate change right to the front doors of one small American town.
Well, if you're not sure what to do with all those political yard signs now that Election Day has passed, a South Florida artist has a suggestion. Simply turn them into reminders about the threat of sea level rise.
And in South Florida, an artist is asking people to turn their old campaign signs into yard art. But the art is also aimed at starting a conversation about sea level rise. It's part of a project called the Underwater Homeowners Association. The artist behind the effort is Xavier Cortada.
Xavier Cortada is asking, what is Miami's artistic response to the crisis of our time? The crisis he's talking about is sea level rise.
So during the Q&A, we can talk a little bit more about the kind of responses where you get to literally do a little citizen science, where you get to use some technology and an app, and you get to literally map the elevation of a city so that the different neighborhoods know what their vulnerability is, and hopefully by having a self-interest, they begin to advocate to decrease the suffering in the future by sacrificing it all today. That's the value of applied science in the community. It's been my honor to share this with you. We'll wait for the Q&A. Thank you.
Got to navigate the buttons. Well, thank you so much, Xavier. That was wonderful, and it's really moving and impactful work that you're working on. So again, a synthesis of art, data, and visualization of climate change in a very different way from Marie, dealing with a similar issue. Again, if you have questions for Xavier, please submit them in the Q&A chat box, and we will get to them at the end in the Q&A session. I'm super happy to introduce our next speaker, Andrea Polli, with a great talk ahead called Hack the Grid. And a few words about Andrea. She is an environmental artist working at the intersection of art, science, and technology. Her research has been presented as public artworks, media installations, community projects, performances, broadcasts, mobile and geolocative media, publications, and through the curation and organization of public exhibitions and events. She creates artwork designed to raise the awareness of environmental issues. Often these works express scientific data obtained through her collaborations with scientists and engineers, and have taken the form of sound art, vehicle-based works, public light works, mobile media experiences, and bio art and design. Polli holds an MFA in Time Arts from the School of Art Institute in Chicago, and a PhD in practice-led research from the University of Plymouth in the UK. So without further ado, take it away, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Anur. It's great to be here with these panelists, and great to go after Xavier. I love seeing the mangroves in that video too, and HOA project is amazing. Let me quickly share my screen. I'm going to fly through, and I need to stop share because I forgot to do sound. I'm going to fly through a lot of things. that have been kind of codified through my book, Hack the Grid, from a few years ago. And Hack the Grid, you're hearing a lot of things about hacking, and I'm not talking about cyber warfare using the term hack. I'm talking about the earlier computer sciencey term of hack, creating and sharing, hostilities to secrecy, for those programmers, the right to fork or share your code, distaste of authority, freedom of inquiry, sharing as ideology and strategy, emphasis on rationality and playful cleverness. And how can the hacking strategies inform helping people to understand energy systems and to advocate and create more green energy systems. So I'm going to go back to 9/11. On 9/11, I walked over this bridge. I worked in Manhattan and lived in Queens, and this is the Queensboro Bridge, 59th Street Bridge. I walked over this bridge with thousands of other people. And this bridge was my view from my window when I was living in New York. And a few months after 9/11, this bridge that has beautiful necklace lights, all the East River bridges have beautiful necklace lights at night, were turned off. And I did some research and I found out that because the city was hit so hard financially with 9/11, reducing tourism, they were unable to afford the energy that it took to light those beautiful necklace lights. And I thought, wow, it's always the first thing to go is always the aesthetics and the art. And why couldn't these lights be powered with renewable energy? Something like this. Looking at that bridge, I also saw, I think I stopped counting at 20 smokestacks around that bridge. So I knew a little bit about wind energy and the barriers to wind energy in beautiful natural surroundings. But I thought, why not put wind turbines in an urban setting? And they could provide power and clean energy. So I built this. I made this as part of a project called New York 2050, which was people after 9/11 getting together, community members thinking about what is the future of the city. And I created this whole proposal, and I even talked to the energy company of New York at the time about it. I talked to engineers, and we did a feasibility. We did the cost analysis, looked at these beautiful vertical turbines that you see here as replacing the spires on the bridge. And it was a several $million project. This was, quite a while ago now, 21 years ago, and I certainly couldn't see creating a multi-million-dollar project, figuring out how to do that, how to make that really happen. So I kind of set the project aside. But one thing I learned was that a feasibility study can be done using consumer grade weather stations. So I got a bunch of these weather stations. I got 5 of these and created a project called Hello Weather, where I shared the weather station data online, and I placed them at community centers all over the world, LA, actually in Switzerland, in India. And then I became really interested in that weather data and how to use it. And I ended up going to Antarctica. This is on Taylor Glacier in the dry valleys of Antarctica, where I worked with some great scientists. These are 3 of them, a biologist, a geologist, and an engineer who gathered the data from weather stations. And I recorded, this is our campsite, this is where we lived in the dry valleys. And I also went to Pole and gathered a whole lot of weather data and interviews with scientists talking about climate change at the time. This was 2007, 2008. Scientists were not even able to use the terms climate change in their federally funded projects. It was what one scientist told me, a war on science. And I used the recordings of those interviews, recordings of the soundscape of Antarctica, and sonifications of the weather data that I gathered to create this album called Sonic Antarctica on the Green Recorder label. And I published a book with Jane Marshing about how digital technologies are converging between scientists, geologists, and biologists working in the field in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and artists that are doing projects with that. So I have been working, as you probably imagine, a lot of data, a lot of work on screen, and we all have that kind of screen fatigue feeling. And I wanted to really think about, if I'm working with weather data, what is weather? What is that material? And as an artist, can I work with that material? So I created this project called Cloud Car, which is a car fitted with a mist system. This is the portable version that inspired by Diller and Skip Video's Blur building. Here it is at the New York Hall of Science, to kind of let people know if, to give the impression of, if you could see the emissions that your car was creating, that your fossil fuel vehicle is creating, this is what it might look like. And when I first showed it, it attracted New York's bravest, the fire department. They thought it was on fire. But when they learned we were doing water propulsion, which is part of their wheelhouse, we talked a lot about that. They put, I love to show, this is one of my proudest moments as an artist, they put the Cloud Car sticker on their fire truck. I found that the mist could also be used as a platform for projection. And I did a few other car related projects. This is called Breather. It was inspired by feeling like I had a bag over my head breathing in New Delhi, India. And this bag over this car expands and contracts over the course of a minute. This is at Parco Arte Vivente in Turin, the home of the Fiat. So I used some vintage Fiats in that. And getting involved in understanding air brought me to work with scientists who were doing particulate monitoring. And I got this particulate monitor called the E-sampler, or the nephelometer. And I created this project called Particle Falls. And I'll just play a little video of that so you can see it. And Particle Falls is a beautiful blue, projected blue waterfall when there's low levels of particulate that turns into a fireball when higher levels of particulate pollution are detected in the atmosphere. And those are usually caused by the burning of fossil fuels, especially diesel vehicles. And I've shown this piece all over the world. This is in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I also had the honor of showing it in Paris during COP21, when the historic climate agreement was formed in 2015. I learned, so that nephelometer that I had to get donated to me from a science company, it costs about $15,000, completely out of reach of a normal consumer. But within about 10 years, consumer grade particulate sensors became available. You could even build one yourself for about $30 using simple microprocessors like these Raspberry Pi and Arduino. And so I started to do some projects using those. And this is in Zagreb, Croatia.
My name's Esther Belen, and I am one of 3 collaborators. I'm working with Andrea Polli and Andrea.
I need to redo that. Sorry. Sorry about the technical difficulty. Oh shoot. Okay. 1 second. So I'm gonna just fly through this again. I'm gonna skip that one, but suffice to say, using these very simple or inexpensive, I should say, particulate monitors really changes the game for people understanding the impacts of fossil fuel burning. And the projection that I was using, of also not consumer grade, very expensive, I've now replaced in many projects with these LED strips that are extremely bright. They can be seen in near daylight, and they're inexpensive and low energy consumption. So 15 years after the Queensbridge project idea, I saw a call for an artist to light one of the three bridges in Pittsburgh from the Three Sisters bridges. And they were renaming one of the bridges after Rachel Carson, the famous environmentalist. And so I made a proposal to light the bridge with wind turbines. And got it. And I worked with a local wind power company called Windstacks, who created 16 custom wind turbines. We used 52 of these microprocessors, very inexpensive microprocessors, to control a animated light work, lighting the wind turbines as well, an animated light work that showed expressed ideas about climate change and showed a real-time visualization of wind power potential on the bridge. The company I worked with had already done a feasibility study with wind power on the rivers in Pittsburgh, so it was a wonderful collaboration, and it took the idea from 15 years earlier to another level. And I'll just show you 1 second. What we called the rainbow rain was the real-time visualization of the wind power potential. That's this here. So the speed and the density of this rainbow rain corresponded to the wind power potential on the bridge. And we ended up creating tons of energy and giving energy back to the grid over the 2 years that this project was in place. Lots of information for people about wind energy and its potential. And because this project was done using these microprocessors and controlled by a cell phone, the project became live in early 2016. And one of the first things that the new president did was pull out of the COP21 agreement and sent this tweet that you see here. I care more about Pittsburgh than Paris. And the mayor of Pittsburgh was very upset about that because he knew that his constituents wanted to follow the climate agreement. So I got a call from the mayor's office, and from my home in New Mexico and my programmer's home in San Francisco, we were able to turn the bridge green for the weekend in support of the people of Pittsburgh, just from our cell phones. And that's what I really think is the wonderful power of this idea of hack the grid. We reused the LEDs for a permanent project in Pittsburgh that has become a kind of a selfie place, and is Garrison Canal is imagining if Pittsburgh was underwater. And I know I'm probably running out of time. I see Honora here. But yeah, and a recent project in Florida, in Tampa, Florida, examining bioluminescent bacteria and its presence. And I can stop here. These are 10 points in the manifesto in the book on the idea of hack the grid. And that's it. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. I wish we had all the time in the world I just wish we could keep having this conversation. It's been such an informative and awesome few minutes. So thank you for that. And again, different aspect of visualization and really tackling that issue of visualizing climate change and using visual elements and data to push the envelope. So I'd like to now introduce our fourth and final speaker for today, Mark SubbaRao, with the talk titled "Making NASA Climate Science Visual." So Mark leads NASA's Scientific Visualization Studio, which is a group tasked with visualizing NASA science results for public audiences. Before joining NASA, Mark spent 18 years at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, where he produced planetarium shows and designed museums. Between 2019 and 2020, Mark was the president of the International Planetarium Society. where he spearheaded Data to Dome initiative, an effort to prepare the planetarium community for the big data era. Before that, he worked at the University of Chicago, where he was part of a team that created the largest 3D map of the universe, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. And Mark's visualizations have been widely featured in print, TV, museums, and even projected on the sides of buildings, similarly to Andrea. His work has received significant recognition, the NSF's VISIs, and the naming of an asteroid. So there's literally an asteroid out there named 170009 SubbaRao. So without further ado, take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Anur. Hopefully everything's projecting properly. Hey, really inspired by my fellow panelists, what I've seen so far. The job of our group is to visualize NASA science, all of NASA science, for communications. That's communication to the public. It's communication from between scientists, and it's communication often to policymakers, for example, during COP26. And when people think about NASA, they think about space. And of course, that is where a lot of NASA's research happens. But a lot of the way we use space is as a platform to study the Earth. So this shows the current fleet of Earth observing satellites around something like 24 that are currently orbiting the Earth. And those satellites allow us to determine and monitor the effects of climate change, whether that's the reduction in Arctic sea ice, or it could be the increase in hurricane activity. And it's the job of our group to visualize all of these science results. In addition to just the observations, NASA scientists do modeling as well. There's a group in New York, the Goddard Institute of Space Studies, who keeps one of the major, along with scientists at NOAA and others around the world, global climate records. And this is data from the worldwide network of weather stations. And here you're seeing 20-some thousand, who's, in addition to other measurements from buoys to cover the ocean, these go into our measurements of global temperature. And this is a visualization of that data. So it goes back to 1880, which is about when we had enough weather stations to get a pretty accurate global measurement. This is a visualization inspired by one that was done by a climate scientist named Ed Hawkins in 2016 and kind of went viral. We recently redid that, trying to both take advantage of the NASA data, but also take advantage of some advances in computer graphics and some more sophisticated techniques to try to make something that was visually appealing. Often our work's about explaining data or getting people to understand data. That's the purpose of data visualization. But there's another purpose, which is the emotional side, to make people feel that data. We know that the climate's rising, but how do we get attention to that? And little tricks in that visualization, letting it overflow its graph, this sort of flip to the side, have turned out to be pretty successful. This has, been widely shared on social media in the last few months. We can also break down that measurement and look at a global map to see, to the best of we can reconstruct how that temperature has changed over this time period in different places on the Earth. And this global map is another big product that we update every year. Of course, as we know, in the last decade, especially, we've seen those temperatures rise quite dramatically. Here's another look at visualizing that same data, but now instead of looking at the map, we're looking at the distribution of temperatures around the globe. And what we see is that distribution is shifting. So it's not just that things are getting warmer and everything's getting a little hotter, but if you look at that far right side of that graph, you see that extreme events are increasing. You'll see the graph comes down, it's actually broadening as well. So it's not just that the average has gotten warmer, we're seeing more and more of those extreme weather events. And here this is another representation of that same thing. This is another way to look at that same data, because you might ask, what is happening? Is it that there's more variation on at any given spot in temperature? Or has the distribution broadened because certain places on Earth are warming faster than others? And it turns out that the latter is the case. Here we can see, and as we get to more recent times, quite dramatically, that warming is happening disproportionately in the Arctic. You're seeing much less warming in the Southern Ocean, where temperatures are moderated by the heat content of the ocean. But the Arctic has been warming, and depending how you measure and which baseline you take, 2 to 3 or even 4 times warmer than the rest of the globe. And that's what we see in this little map. Well, why is it warming? We know that as well. We've been able to track concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is a measurement that's known as the Keeling curve. Charles David Keeling started these observations back in the 1950s. And his plot is one of the most famous plots in all of science. This is a slightly different look at that plot. Usually you just see this wiggly graph increasing. The wiggles happen because the Earth is breathing. It ingests CO2 in the summer, where in the northern hemisphere, southern, because most of the land is in the northern hemisphere, and plants absorb that CO2 and they release it in the winter, which creates this annual cycle. But on top of that is this increase. But what we've done here is we're showing it from 0. And what that shows is just how much an effect humans have had on our atmosphere. If we measure what we think the baseline was at pre-industrial levels, we've now increased the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere 50%. Carbon dioxide is the main influencer on climate in our atmospheres, and we fundamentally changed the nature of our planet. One of the things we're able to do by combining satellite observations, global satellite observations of CO2 levels, but ingesting them into models in a process we call data assimilation, is actually build up a 3D map of where that CO2 is. And so here you're going to watch a year of CO2. You see this pulsing going on in the forest of South America and equatorial Africa. This is the breathing of the planet. You also saw those strong sources of emission in China and in the United States. And you see how emissions in one place quickly spread around the globe. What you'll also notice is if we follow this for a year, we come up and down according to the seasonal cycle. But we're going to end that year with considerably more, about 1.75 parts per million more carbon dioxide than we started with. And that's the problem, is that it takes the Earth a very long time to reabsorb carbon dioxide, but we can emit it very quickly. So we're emitting hundreds of times faster than the Earth can reabsorb. Now, this is I mentioned that sometimes our visuals are meant more for communication to scientists, and this is a pretty complex graph, but it gets at one of the questions, which people may say is, well, maybe the warming that you showed in that spiral is due to the sun, right? Maybe it's part of some natural cycle. And we know that it's due to the greenhouse gases because of what we see in this plot, because it's not just that the surface temperature is warming. If the sun was getting brighter, we would expect the temperature in the upper atmosphere to get brighter as well. But we're actually seeing a cooling in the upper atmosphere and a warming on the surface. And that's because our atmosphere is trapping that heat and not letting it get to the upper atmosphere. And so this is the smoking gun that we are the cause of the warming that we're seeing. It's really not debatable. Some of the other work we do looks at how is that going to impact humans. So we can take these climate models and project them, not just reconstruct what happened in the past, but project them in the future and combine them with models of crops and see how our crop production will change in the future. And here we're looking at two different crops and seeing two different stories. So wheat is able to take advantage, especially in northern latitudes, of the extra CO2 in the atmosphere. And we actually expect wheat yields to increase over the next century, except for notably some equatorial regions where we'll see a decrease. But maize or corn has quite the opposite story. And there, because corn doesn't like that extra heat, we actually will expect significant reductions in our agricultural output. And it's not just the crops that will suffer, it's the people working those crops as well. So this is a recent visualization we did to kind of show how as the climate warms, we expect more and more days where working conditions will actually exceed a threshold that's considered unhealthy. So not only will it be harder to grow crops in certain regions, but it'll be harder for the people working. So that's kind of a whirlwind overview of some of the different visualizations we do. Hope to chat more about that in the next session, but I just want to point out that everything we do is fully available for the public to use in their products, to remix and reuse. Hopefully, I'd love to convince some of the artists on the panel to use some of our content. It's all freely available here on our website, which is in the upper right-hand corner. And this is a list of some of my team who worked on the different visualizations. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Again, another element a little bit more zoomed out and really just a crucial part of the puzzle when trying to visualize our climate change and this crisis that we all are living through. So with that, I'd love to invite all of our panelists to turn on their cameras and come back on stage for our Q&A session. Great. Awesome. So yeah, I just want to start off with a broader question, which is when you look at all of when you have all of this kind of crisis visualized, it can be a pretty depressing response. It can be very anxiety provoking for people, individuals. And so I think what can people do in their own lives, and how should people look at this after they've been made aware by your art or your visualizations, etc. And I open this kind of question to anyone who wants to tackle it, but what's next for people, and what needs to happen after they've been made aware?
I think ideally, people are getting inspired by these works to learn more and learn about what's possible to do. I mean, seeing what Marie is doing with clay is just, incredible, because there's just there's a niche for everyone. There's a need for everyone and everyone's skills.
I hear us many times. I'm told, my God, it sounds so doom and gloom, and I just want to push back and let us know that we're beyond gloom and doom. This is a crisis, and we're heading straight to 1.5 degrees Celsius, maybe more. I mean, I was at COP26. I'm embarrassed about the results. As the UN Secretary General said, it's a lot of lip service, right? There's nothing that we as a world community are doing to reduce that carbon in the atmosphere. There's just a lot of lip service. So I am, sort of wanting us to understand that 1.5 means that we are sentencing 500 million human beings to death. I mean, there's no other way of saying that. That's what we're doing by our inaction. So there is this urgency, and it's not resonating, I think, because we don't feel it. And I think we don't feel it because we don't see it. And I think that's why it's so important for us to not just show it, but have you feel what you see. And I think that's why experiences matter, experiential. But what I try to do more than anything else, and I engage in slow activism, is to make you care about others, including others not yet born. So it's really a shift about how we understand who we are. It's not about the immediate family, the immediate household, your kids. It's literally about us in the context of society and humans not yet born. And that means that we need to learn how to love. And that's something that we think we know how to do, but I think as a society, and if we look at our policies, there's a lot of room for love. And I try to let people understand that we can empathize, we can work together to solve this. And I think by giving people the opportunity for them to realize their role in being change agents, we can begin to change the dynamic. And all I care about is creating a cadre of science literate, engaged citizens. Because if I have that, then our world will be okay. And the kids who walked outside of COP26, the ones who led me all over Glasgow, those kids have it. So I think we need to build that kind of future.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I'd love to take a few questions from the audience that have been submitted. I guess let's start with a question from Marie. So from Andreas. So dear Marie, I'm curious about whether you considered alternatives to using clay, cement, or something else, because burning clay requires ovens, which are usually not big enough to burn bricks at scale, while cement is burned at scale during production. Do you know the emissions footprint of clay versus cement? And are living organisms more likely to settle on clay or cement or other materials? If you could share some nerdy comments, he would appreciate it, or they would appreciate it.
Thank you. I just answered it. If you want to have more, I think, but thank you for these questions because those are very important ones. When you have an intervention in nature, you always have to be very aware of what type of materials you're going to be using, because of course you don't want to damage any type of ecosystem. You want to help, so you have to know a little bit before. When working underwater, there is not so many types of materials you can work with, especially if you want to do structure where corals that can be very heavy has to be sustained for a very long period. So you're not going to work with materials that has to be replaced after a couple of years. So it turns out you have only mineral-based materials such as cement, clay, like concrete, or metal, sometimes some types of metals, and clay. You could also go with plastic, but for me, it's absolutely not an option. So I decided to work with the most non-invasive type of material, which is clay, and that presents amazing properties for the coral growth and marine life that can be attached to this material. But also in terms of footprints and emissions, there is a couple of things that has to be considered. It's always the whole life cycle of the material. So you cannot always say that concrete is better or clay is better in terms of footprint emission, because it depends where you're going to install the installation, where the material has been extracted, how it has been extracted. So it's quite difficult to answer that question, and there is like no real answer. It always has to be put into a context. I would say though, to scale up to scale up a vision like this and create like barrier reefs, of course, if you think of clay or concrete is much more easier because you don't have to burn it. However, we have to first analyze different types of materials and the growth of those organisms on different types of materials to be sure to not do crazy wrong installation, because even though concrete might be an easier option, it might actually not really help. And in terms of scaling solution, you can always think of industrialization. And if you think about the bricks or the tiles, you have huge ovens that are like 100 meters long with like literally wagons, like a train going in. So you could also go and scale up like this. It's just a matter of always putting into a context and also getting data. That is absolutely important. Without scientific data, you cannot really take up into these decisions. But luckily, there's a lot of papers on material research for marine organisms and marine life. So if you're interested into that, I can, of course, private comment, give you a little bit more insight.
Thank you, Marie. I want to take a question for Mark. Do you have a favorite way to visualize data that you find makes the biggest impact? So in other words, which of your visualizations have you found have the biggest whoa factor? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, I think the spiral that I showed right now it has probably had the biggest impact. And it always is a bit problem dependent. But with this data, often it's actually small data. A lot of the stuff we'd visualize is sort of big data. I spent a lot of time looking through the comments, online and seeing like what resonated with people and what didn't. And if you look at this particular way of visualizing, what is essentially just one number, what's our temperature over time? It's actually, by most of the standards of data visualization, a terrible visualization. The circle is supposed to show you variations over the year in different months. There actually are no seasonal variations. If you just want to read the data, it's hard to read a graph like that. If you want to read the numbers off, it'd be much easier just to show a bar chart. I think what gets people's attention, really the point was to get people's attention, is one, seeing something unusual. So if you can do something in a way that's aesthetically pleasing, but also unusual, something they haven't seen before, it'll attract attention. Primarily that's happening through social media, where you have like 2 seconds to capture someone's attention. So like motion and energy is another aspect to that. And then telling a narrative through that story. So like when we did that visualization, just little subtle things like we kind of set a boundary to that and we have like the labels, but it overflows. So it surprises you how big it gets at the end. And then the little trick at the end. And if you look at social media, people are always saying like, wait for the end, wait for it. It's kind of like a lot of these viral videos and the expectation of the payoff. So I think like paying a lot attention to that narrative structure that is successful just helps us get our content out there.
Awesome. So I have a question here from someone in the audience for Xavier. This person grew up in North Miami. Their parents still live there. Elevation 4.58 feet. Citizen engaged art seems like a great way to create agency around climate change. Do you think there's also a role for large-scale landscape art in Miami? Think Christo's famous wrapping of islands in Biscayne Bay, but in a way that can provoke debate on climate change?
Yeah, look, Miami is in a bizarre place right now. It's a city that is literally in an existential crisis, but the real estate property here is out of control. It is making people blind to the fact of the Achilles heel of sea level rise. The prices for real estate here are way, way, way beyond any bubble we've seen before. So it's difficult. It's difficult to try to get folks to understand, including your parents' home at 4.58, that's probably not a good investment. That literally isn't, because in time, banks aren't going to want to loan a 30-year mortgage to buy your dad's home. And in lesser time, your flood insurance rates are going to go through the roof. And when other communities start to have low real estate values because of their vulnerability, the tax base for the entire county begins to go down. But no one wants to talk about that doom and gloom. Everyone's looking forward with anticipation that technology will solve the problem, right? Or that they're in the here and now, that sort of instant gratification. So I do believe that visual, and I'm completely with you, Mark, unusual, absolutely unusual things. That's all I've ever done with my career. Like I plant green flags next to trees so that you notice the trees. I put mangroves in water-filled cups to showcase that you need to bring nature back into a built environment. And over here in Miami, through this underwater, I'm actually trying to do that. I'm trying to have citizens map the topography, literally households, neighborhood by neighborhood, understand their vulnerability. But it's hard. It's really hard because what you want to put is a big for sale sign because, you know, now you're getting 40% more than that home was worth just a few years ago. So it's creating these experiential activities that allow people to do that. Regarding land art, including Christos, and I was a kid driving across those causeways and loving those pieces. But, you know, there are environmental consequences to the action. And I think that land art also, you know, I tread very carefully when I work on land. So, you know, they're ephemeral, they're temporary, but more importantly, they're participatory. People are engaged in the art making. So I have a bunch of projects like that I've been doing here in Miami for years. And the latest one is going to be trying to tell our commissioners not to build in protected lands. That's a vote that's coming up next month, trying to get a line of people to stand at the boundary where they want to develop. Important to protect our Everglades flow and to clean our water in Biscayne Bay, a bay that's in the precipice of regime change where your parents lived. So we're going to be doing a project with individuals, but again, it takes a cadre of caring, compassionate, science-engaged citizens who will not get duped by greenwashing. And we have a lot of work to do.
Thanks. Andrea, did you want to add something?
I actually wanted to say something related to what Mark was talking about. I was thinking about the red ball, I guess they're calling it, that Mark showed some of. And I think that it's important to state this idea of, as Xavier was saying, scientifically engaged community members, because as you think about the red ball, right, you know, there's this issue of understanding how visualizations work, right? So that scale could have changed and it could have been an orange ball or a yellow ball, you know, it just depends on what the scale was. What makes that so, I think, poignant for me and a lot of other people is understanding that the scientists who were creating that visualization created the scale, and the scale that their expectations set up, as Mark was saying about these visualizations with expectations, went, you know, way off the charts. And you need to, in order to understand that and have that poignancy, I think you need to have a sense that scientists are human beings, that they, and respect for the work that they're doing, and all those elements that are so important that I think, you know, Laser Boston and Swissnex are trying to make happen. But it really comes down to having a scientifically literate population in order to be able to see the significance of this.
Awesome.
I see Mark nodding, so I'd love
100%. Yeah, very much so. And, you know, we're always in climate, visualizing climate science. The problem is we want to keep long-term records, and we're constantly having to rescale and rescale because we keep exceeding those levels year after year after year.
A lot of my work has been about trying to engage communities to become future scientists or even like scientists. So there's a lot of participatory work where I try to humanize these awesome human beings that share so much with artists and their idea to innovate and to literally help us understand our world. So that's why I also appreciate, Andrea, the work you do, and of course the work all of us do as panelists, and this particular group for inviting us, because it's at that intersection of science and art.
Awesome. Well, I certainly appreciate you all taking the time out of your days to speak at this event, and also to everyone tuning in. You know, this is something that I care deeply about personally. and it's something that I think many people around the world are beginning to open their eyes to, or have had their eyes wide open for many years. And so really, this is just the beginning of a conversation, and I encourage you all to reach out and explore all of our panelists' work. Really interact with this stuff and explore this field of visualizing climate change and the climate crisis, and see what you can do in your life and in the lives of others to make an impact. And yeah, so I appreciate everyone's time, and I think we'll just wrap it up there. So thank you so much to Mark, Xavier, Andrea, and Marie, and a big thank you to Julia from SciArt and my team at Swissnex. And yeah, so have a wonderful afternoon, and hopefully, yeah, we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.